Australia has a very long, proud history as a nation sending volunteers overseas. In fact, we predate even the Peace Corps. 1951 was the very first year that Herb Feith left Australia, and the Volunteer Graduate Scheme, which came up out of Melbourne University, was the forerunner of Overseas Service Bureau, Australian Volunteers Abroad, and now Australian Volunteers International. So Australia has had an organised form of international volunteering since 1951, and we have a very long, proud history of international volunteering based on solidarity, mutual exchange of skills and experience, and also in terms of people-to-people links. So we've been very true to the core values of international volunteering, and people embrace volunteers right across the globe. We currently have volunteers in the Middle East, across Africa, all of Asia, and across Pacific. Previously, we've been in Latin America as well. There's something about the Aussie spirit. We're very pragmatic. We don't get too political. We're actually very down to earth as volunteers. We roll up our sleeves, got a good sense of humour, and get the job done. People love Australians as volunteers. In terms of professional areas, we send volunteers right across the spectrum. So whether it's engineering, health, legal governance, education, business development. But I'd have to say the great percentage of assistance is always needed in those skills where community service organisations are really desperate for help. So that tends to be in the areas of legal, marketing, IT, administration, human resources. Most community service organisations overseas are struggling in those administration and governance areas. They do their core work, whether it's social work or environmental work or whatever it might be on the ground, but it's often struggling in those administration areas of governance and those strategic planning, those processes around HR, IT, finance and marketing. And that's often where our volunteers help the most. And it really does, those skills are gold, organisations overseas. And often Australians don't realise what they might think a fairly prosaic set of skills are actually invaluable to help local organisations achieve the vision that they want for the community they serve. The very first volunteer, Herb Feith, went to Indonesia. We've been involved everywhere from Mongolia all the way through to Bangladesh, Pakistan, right across to Timor. Every country is different, Will. Every country has its own particular nuance and culture for the volunteers, and we make a very big deal that the volunteers live, working and learning within a community, so that their best way of working through and living a real joyous experience as a volunteer as they struggle with a local organisation achieving its vision is to get to know that local nuance of the culture. Yes, often Asian countries prefer older volunteers, more experienced, but that doesn't mean that younger Australians do not have a fantastic time when they understand the nuances of respect and the way that different cultures work. So, I mean, for our volunteers, they might be working in Muslim countries in the Middle East, the African countries, Melanesian countries, but the Asian countries have a certain culture nuance, and it's really important that our volunteers understand that. In every single country, you do your best work when you listen for the first 6 months, when you get to know the language, when you understand the level of respect that is needed from a volunteer. It's not about the Australian or the Western way of doing things. It's about really listening and becoming part of a local community and learning from their skill sets as well. I mean, many of our volunteers come back and say they received so much more than they ever gave as a volunteer, and it's a new set of eyes. So whether you're working in Laos or Timor or India or Mongolia or, the Western regions of China, for the volunteer to really understand those local nuances and to be respectful of the local culture, particularly through learning language, is just so important. But the 2-year time frame of our volunteers also really helps as well. Those long-term relationships are really very important, particularly in Asian communities. But there's something also about the Australian sense of humour when it's done gently and with respect that Asian communities really embrace as well. but our volunteers are very committed to getting the job done, and that is what's so important whichever country our volunteers go to. Absolutely. I think volunteering is a fantastic way for nations to think about better international respect. So volunteering is not about aid, and to be honest, it's only about little d development. Volunteering is about true people-to-people links, and I honestly believe that every Australian and every Australian organisation needs to have a respectful international relationship. I am so amazed that at every one of our pre-departure briefings, Australians from right across the country are saying that we are willing to lend a hand to our close neighbours and our further away neighbours, to say we're willing to live in another person's country and to live, work and learn respectfully. And if we have these long-term relationships based on people-to-people links, and it's not just individuals, organisations are volunteering overseas. Whole communities, for example, the friendship cities with East Timor, communities and organisations are saying we are willing to actually have a long-term relationship that's sustainable and it's based on exchanges. So people are coming backwards and forwards between Australia and the country where people are linked with. And this is long-term sustainable relationships that builds a different form of development. It's almost a beyond development agenda. It's not welfare, it's about strengthening each other's vision and commitment to a different sort of a world. And those sort of relationships are bigger than just the job description the volunteer undertakes. It's really about mutual respect and sharing and learning from the ways that we all operate in our world, whether it's environmental sustainability, a different way of doing social work, working with people with a disability. Australians don't have all the answers, and volunteering, long-term volunteering based on true people-to-people links and sustainability is where you start to learn and break down those barriers and those myths and legends that people have when they use terms like developed and developing countries. So I do think that volunteering, when Australians get out way beyond capital cities and build those links, I've had so many people, Will, come up and just give me a hug to say, your volunteers are doing wonderful work, but what we really love is the fact that Australians are willing to give up their lifestyle and live with us for 2 years. And that's a real compassion that people feel from Australians. And these are fantastic memories. This is a really brilliant way to get the diplomacy and the soft power building when you've got great long-term communication and an understanding where people can talk about global issues, local issues, and build long-term friendships. That's soft power in reality. And I think international volunteering just does not live in the aid and development sector. It's education, it's foreign affairs, it's really good neighbourhood and about global citizenship. And it's the sort of deep relationships our planet is crying out for.